Good morning, my name is Claudia Delpero. I run Europe 3 News, which is a news service created specifically for Europeans who are in the UK and British who live in the rest of Europe to inform about the changing context of their status and also to provide a European perspective of what is Brexit, not just one national point of view. It's a pleasure to introduce Isabella and Tahmid today. They are the founders of Here for Good, an organization who offers free legal advice to Europeans in the UK. So we talk of a more human side of Brexit here. Why did you create this organization?
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, everyone, for having us. I never thought I'd cut Vicky Price short in a speech, but there we go. My background started around Brexit shortly after the referendum, where I was one of the claimants in the Article 50 litigation with Jean Miller last year. I co-founded a group called the People's Challenge. I'm still the director of that group. And what we were trying to really do during the case is highlight the real impact on citizens' rights and citizens' lives as a result of us leaving the EU. We were successful, of course, in the Supreme Court, but we sort of continued that on a policy level, and we're still continuing that today. But what I found, and with Bella, is that as much as we talk about the policy impact of Brexit, there are people's lives at stake, 3 million people's lives at stake here in the UK, and British expats abroad as well. And we wanted to do something that would provide a bit more tangibility, something a bit more raw to what their rights actually need and what their perspective needs. So then with a group of lawyers, we've set up Here for Good, still in our early stages. But yeah, here we are, and our aim is to provide free immigration advice to the most in-need EU citizens who are living here in the UK.
Should we just step back for a moment? What is the situation now in terms of permanent residence and how it is shifting towards settled status? And so where is your service coming in place?
So at the moment, of course, all EU nationals have the right to continue as they have been for the last years being in the UK. From what we know, although there's still a lot of uncertainty, that's up until March 2019. And until then, they can apply for permanent residence, and our organisation hopes to be able to help them to do so. The first step for Here to Good was to produce this guide with 2 immigration law firms, Wesley Grix Listers and Bymans, who are a big public law firm. And basically, this guide is called Act Now to Stay Here for Good, and it sets out how EU citizens can apply for permanent residence or resident status to protect their rights in the UK at the moment. And as the situation changes and merges into the new system of settled status, we hope to set up an advisory service that will help people to continue to apply for an immigration document that allows them to stay in the UK.
So I guess a lot of people here have been through this process, and we keep hearing that everything is going to be okay. So is there specifically a category at risk or some categories at risk?
The one thing I would say, just from a policy perspective at least, is exactly what David Davis said shortly after December 2017, which is nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. So however much the government might promise, and that's not to frighten anyone, especially those who we're trying to help, but it's just a reality that until we've actually agreed on a deal, any guarantee of citizens' rights doesn't actually create any rights, and it doesn't guarantee those rights. It's just lip service at the moment, and that's really what we're trying to address, is that uncertainty and trying to give practical advice to people to make sure that they can guarantee their rights rather than just relying on what the government says.
Mm-hmm. And can everybody apply then for permanent residence or settled status in the future?
Also, at the moment, as I'm sure many of you know, and maybe many of you also apply for citizenship, you need to be exercising 3 movement rights in the UK for 5 years to apply for permanent residence. And also family members, non-EA nationals, can additionally apply for residence in that scenario. But yeah, as Tahmid said, the issue is that there's just still a lot of uncertainty around it. And what our advice service hopes to do is to provide EU immigrants with up-to-date advice on what they can do. And just because the Home Office website says, don't act now, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily trust them to that extent. And we want to provide a service that will help those EU citizens that can't necessarily afford immigration advice. Because as a trainee solicitor at an immigration law firm, I know that it can be quite expensive, and therefore we're hoping to help those that are most in need to be able to apply for these status and remain here in the UK.
So how do you plan to give this service? Where are you based, or where will you be based?
Okay, so we launched recently in February, and our first step was to create this free advice guide, which is available for everyone. It's on our website, and anyone can access it and download it. And then our next step is to set up this advisory service. What we did when Tahmid and I had the idea back in May 2017 is we did a lot of research about the available free legal immigration services across the UK. And we found that there's actually a huge lack of free immigration advice for EU citizens across the UK, particularly outside London. So, for example, back when we did the research, there's 229,000 EU immigrants living in the East Midlands, but there are only 3 law centres that provide free legal advice for EU citizens and their family members. And so what we want to do is set up caseworkers based across the UK in different regions, particularly outside London, that spend 5 days a week giving free legal advice to EU immigrants in those areas, and perhaps travelling outside major cities to reach everyone that's affected and those that are most in need to get advice.
And how do you plan to fund this service?
So we're in the process of fundraising, and I'll hand over to Tahmid.
So far, we've been really fortunate in getting an incredible group of supporters on board, and they've just given their services for free, pretty much. 2 law firms, which Bella mentioned, all of our trustees and supporters, graphic designers, all sorts of people have given a huge amount to us for free. And that's got us to the position we're in so far, which is standing in front of you, having produced what we hope is going to be a useful guide for people. The advisory service isn't going to be cheap. The whole reason, I have no doubt that there are law centres across the country who want to be able to provide the service. This, through a lack, they're not set up to be able to provide free services in the way that we're hoping to. So it's not cheap. We need about £150,000 to £175,000 just on our sort of minimum scale, and we're in the process of trying to do that. But we've got some, hopefully some investors and some, trusts and foundations and that sort of thing. But we'll also be launching a crowdfunding campaign in the next month or so. So we hope everyone in this room will tell people about it.
So, is this service meant to be just for the emergency for now, or is it something you plan long term in the future?
So I think it will be around until while it's needed. So I think it's very likely that it's going to be needed definitely in the next 5 years as we go through the transition period. Well, first exiting the EU and then the transition period after that. And it seems as likely it's going to be needed after that as well for those EU immigrants that arrive even after their transition period, and there'll be a new set of immigration rules that are known at this point for those EU citizens. So I guess Here for Good will be around as long as it
for good,
as long as it needs to be, probably for good, to help everyone who wants to stay here, which I hope, despite the title of this conference, that a lot of you do want to stay and are encouraged to stay, and it'll be around, to help people stay while they want to.
Okay. Shall we take a couple of questions, if there are any from the audience?
If I'm coming to you for advice, is there something that you can say what should be prepared in terms of applications or so, or do you have any suggestion what we should bring?
So if you came to us, our advisory service, we'd obviously give you the full list of documentation that you need to apply, depending on how long you've lived here. It does depend on each individual's circumstances. It also depends on whether you've, say, been self-sufficient in the UK or working here for a period of 5 years. It depends on your absences to and from the UK. So we'd obviously our aim is to set up caseworkers who would give comprehensive advice and actually help people fill out the full application if they need that help. Some people's situations are much more straightforward, especially if you've been in the same job for 5 years here. The process is quite simple. But in other situations, for example, if you've been self-sufficient, particularly at the moment with issues surrounding comprehensive sickness insurance, it can be more tricky. So in that sense, our caseworkers would be there to guide you through the whole process and give you information about what evidential support you need.
Anybody else? Okay.
How do you handle cases where, because of Data Protection Act, companies do not have information that you are requesting? I have an example. I went to IBM saying I worked for you for 5 years, 95 to 2000. And the official answer is we lost all the employment records for that company in 2006. So they just don't have it. They lost it. They don't have any obligation to have it. And they invoke data protection to say that, tough, we can clean it after 7 years.
I don't know about the specifics of cases like that. What I would say is the government at the moment, if you can trust anything that they're going to say, you could probably trust when they say the evidential requirements are going to be slightly lower in the next couple of years than they previously have been, which includes from now, yeah. That's not clear from the Home Office right now in terms of their policy because, as I said, nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. But part of individual cases would be to look at actually what pressure could you put on IBM, for example, or any of those cases.
But if we want to apply for PR today under the current regime, the burden of the proof is on the citizen, and data protection allowed companies to purge any information past 7 years. Actually, they have to delete the information after 7 years.
I wouldn't be able to answer that question for you right now, but our lawyers are downstairs, so they'll hopefully be able to answer.
I'm just going to say we need to stop this session, and I'm really, really sorry about it. If you want to ask specific questions to lawyers about your case, there are plenty downstairs, and I think that's where you should do it. But thank you very much for being here, and I think what you're doing is fantastic, because there are so many people who do not have the luxury of being able to pay for lawyers to help them out. So thank you very much.
Thank you.